Hello, I'm glad that you're watching today. This is Tuesday, June the 9th, and we'll be looking in the book of 1 Peter as we continue to study through that book, and today we come to chapter 4 and beginning at verse 1. You may say, as you think about some words of encouragement today, why would you be looking at this section? Peter's been talking in chapter 3 and then on into this chapter about suffering and about some of the difficulties that these Christians are enduring. And so I think that Peter, and the way he encourages them, is by telling them how to deal with these things and some things to think about. And so let's take a look at those today. We'll begin in verse 1. If you'd like to read along with me, 1 Peter 4, verse 1. Since therefore Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves with the same way of thinking, for whoever has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, so as to live for the rest of the time in the flesh, no longer for human passions, but for the will of God. For the time that is past suffices for doing what the Gentiles want to do, living in sensuality, passions, drunkenness, orgies, drinking parties, and lawless idolatry. With respect to this, they are surprised when you do not join them in the same flood of debauchery, and they malign you. But they will give account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. That's through verse 5, and I think we can take at least 3 big points of encouragement as we look at this passage today. First of all, I want you to know that when we do have to suffer, that Christ has given us the example, and so we are well equipped to be able to face that suffering. We are well equipped to be able to face those things that we have to face. He says that we are to arm ourselves. We are equipped. We are armed. We have the things that we need to be able to endure whatever suffering there is. Christ suffered. Now, we might also have to suffer. And it says here, an interesting statement, whoever has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin. I don't think that means that people who suffer never sin, but what it does is it gives us something to focus on. Focus on overcoming those hard things. Focus on overcoming that suffering. And so maybe instead of looking at the temptations and the things that would pull us astray, we are centered in our thinking about overcoming those difficult things. But we're armed for those things. The second thing I wanted you to notice here is that people can change. He says, we've done enough of this in the past. And so these people had changed. The people they interact and they talk to about the gospel, they can change. But here's a great point. Maybe you're struggling with some sin. Maybe there's some part of your life that is not like you want it to be. That you want to be more Christ-like. You want to be more faithful. You want to be stronger. You want to be more well-armed for the suffering that you might have to endure. Well, here he tells us that people can change. And so that's good news. That's great news, that when we are struggling, we can overcome those things, and we can be strong, and we can make those changes that are needed to be made in our lives. Let's look at one more thing in this passage of Scripture that I think is an encouragement. And it's kind of a scary kind of encouragement. But he talks about those who are that you used to run with, and they think it's weird that you're not still doing those same things. He says that they will give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. Now here's something that we need to think about. There is going to be an accounting. Now, we don't rejoice when anyone is lost. We don't rejoice when anyone forsakes or refuses the gospel. That makes us very sad. But here is the point of encouragement, is that when we are faithfully enduring the suffering and we have our minds armed to be like Christ and to overcome suffering and to be faithful no matter what, and we realize that when there's things in our life that needs to change, we can change those. Well, here's a great point, that God sees that and he knows that, and that there will be a judgment, and that he will judge the living and the dead, and we'll give an account. Isn't it wonderful that we could give an account to him that says, I'm a child of God. I have lived my life to the very best of my ability to be faithful. When I've stepped out of line, when I've sinned, I've repented of those things. I've brought that before God, and I've asked for his forgiveness. Back when I obeyed the gospel, and we see those great points that we look at there, points of encouragement. So could you take those with you today? Could you take with you the fact that you are equipped to deal with the suffering that you have to do? You can look to Christ as an example. Would you also look, as you examine this, that people can change, you can change. And people who you think maybe would never listen to the gospel, well, they just might. People can change. And the third point that we just talked about is that there will be a judgment, there will be an accounting, and we want to be found as faithful children of God. I hope you'll consider those things today. Continue to study along with us in 1 Peter. My name is Paul Adams, and this has been 5 Minutes of Encouragement.